When a new series based on George R. R. Martin's works is released, the gods toss a coin and wait for the reaction of Game of Thrones fans. Will they send one of the faceless men after the screenwriters, or will the writer himself suddenly rise from the Iron Throne, scold the director's wrong decisions, and once again put the Winds of Winter on hold indefinitely? In short, it's time for fascinating discussions, heated debates, insider news, spoilers, interviews, and in-depth analyses once more. So adjust your furs and gowns, check the reliability of the stopper in your wineskin. We're heading to Lord Ashford's castle, to one so far unremarkable tournament. The new series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, is a prequel to Game of Thrones. It's based on George R. R. Martin's novellas collected in a cycle titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. They're now being released as a separate edition, but will tell the original story a bit later. The show's plot follows the adventures of two of the author's most beloved literary characters, Dunk and Egg. The official synopsis promises that the incredible and incomparable friends will face great destinies, powerful enemies, and dangerous adventures. Dunk is a tall and simple-minded young knight, while Egg is his bald young squire. The series begins when the old knight, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, whom the main character served as a squire, dies, and now Dunk must decide on his own where to go and what to do next. The first season includes the main character's early adventures when he first meets his young companion. They enter a tournament despite having no noble name and insufficient resources. Development. The project's development began quite a while ago as fans had been calling for an adaptation of the novellas about Dunk and Egg. Rumors had been circulating even during the production of Game of Thrones, but it was only in January 2021 that Variety reported on the early stage of developing the adaptation. Sources indicated that the series is a high priority for the premium cable channel and aligned with its ambitions to expand the universe launched by Game of Thrones. Although at that point the project had neither screenwriters nor, let alone, actors attached, the channel's management already considered A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms as one of the main contenders for a new series. The project became part of Warner Brothers' overall strategy to actively develop successful franchises. HBO officially ordered the production of the series in April 2023. Initially, the project was titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, The Hedge Knight. George R. R. Martin was appointed as one of the screenwriters and executive producer of the new show. Later, the working title was shortened to A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Martin then explained why the familiar title Dunk and Egg wasn't used. George felt that Dunk and Egg sounded like a sitcom and compared the phrasing to shows like Laverne and Shirley or Abbott and Costello. He insisted that the word knight must be present in the title, since knighthood and honor are the central themes of the cycle. General description. For the lead roles, HBO cast Peter Claffey and Dexter Saul Ansell. Claffey had previously appeared in the Apple TV Plus series Bad Sisters, while Ansell made his debut in the ITV series Emmerdale. Besides, Ansell also starred in the prequel to The Hunger Games as young Coriolanus Snow, quite a name for some bastard from the Northern Houses. Martin briefly described the tone of the new series as much shorter and completely different than in Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. Showrunner Ira Parker called the series a lighter, more friendly way into Westeros, where viewers can relax before it becomes Westeros again and various things start happening. Unlike epic war sagas with extensive ensemble casts and many locations, the stories about Dunk and Egg are more intimate narratives focused solely on two characters. A key feature, strongly supported by George, was maintaining a single point of view. The audience will experience the entire plot through Dunk's eyes. Ira confirmed that in the first season they filmed everything through the POV of Dunk, which influenced the music, cinematography, and costumes. According to Parker, since Dunk grew up in the slums of King's Landing and has neither name nor inheritance, this approach gave the series a more grounded, gritty, and earthy feel. Parker hopes the audience will forgive the show's roughness, as they deliberately portray a simple and clumsy man facing tasks that are too difficult for him. The project brought together an experienced and creative team. Martin and Parker are co-authors and executive producers, According to Parker, he was brought on to adapt Dunk and Egg quite unexpectedly, early in the morning when he received an SMS from HBO. Initially, Ira worked as a screenwriter on another Game of Thrones prequel, House of the Dragon. Martin himself watched the rough cut and called the series as faithful an adaptation as any reasonable person could hope for. The creators say the series isn't just about lining their pockets, but serves as an important addition to the on-screen Westeros. Among the executive producers were initially listed House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal, Vince Girardes, Owen Harris, and Sarah Bradshaw. Journalists saw Condal's involvement as a good sign for the project, but later, after a conflict with George, things didn't look so rosy anymore. Now it's clear that Ryan doesn't have much influence on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. First season and cast. The first season will consist of 6 episodes, matching the volume of the source material, the novella The Hedge Knight, roughly 160 pages. Parker originally envisioned the series having a standard format of 10-hour-long episodes, as is common in the franchise. However, HBO proposed a different structure, and they settled on 6 episodes. In addition, the series uses a shorter half-hour episode format. The showrunner admitted that Martin's novellas don't contain enough material for 10 episodes. The shortened format allowed for the most faithful adaptation of The Hedge Knight. George had previously stated that the material was more suitable for a film. According to Ira, since the series now has twice as much time as a typical feature film, it's a mix of original material and targeted additions from the team. The director's chair was shared between Owen Harris and Sarah Adina Smith. Harris, known for directing the famous episode San Junipero from Black Mirror, as well as episodes of Mrs. Davis and The Scoundrels, served as executive producer and director of the first 3 episodes. Sarah Adina Smith directed the remaining 3 episodes. She was brought on after Harris had established the show's visual direction and filmed the first half of the season. In October 2023, casting director Lucy Bevan announced a search for actors with an eye towards 2024. Production officially began in June 2024 in Belfast. The choice of filming location in this northern Irish city is important, as most of the original Game of Thrones was shot there. As production was underway, the creators announced an extensive cast. Besides Peter and Dexter, whom we'll discuss separately, the cast included 5 key actors. Finn Bennett, a rising star known for True Detective, Night Country, landed the role of Prince Aerion Targaryen. Bertie Carvel, who played former Prime Minister Tony Blair in The Crown, was cast as Prince Baelor Targaryen. Sam Spruell, remembered for his role as the villain Ole Monk in the 5th season of Fargo, will play Prince Maekar Targaryen. Among other important characters announced in June were Tamsin Crawford as the puppeteer Tansel and Daniel Ings as the knight Sir Lionel Baratheon, also known as the Laughing Storm. Martin actively praised the actors found for the lead roles, calling Peter Claffey and Dexter Saul Ansell simply incredible, and also complimented the rest of the cast, mentioning that viewers should look forward to meeting the Laughing Storm and Tansel Too Tall. In early August 2024, the cast expanded with 7 more actors. Henry Ashton was cast as Daeron Targaryen. Yusef Kerker played Stilly Pate. Daniel Webb got a small part as Sir Arlen of Pennytree, while Sean Thomas and Edward Ashley played Ryman and Stefan Fossaway, respectively. By the end of the year, the list already included more than 20 actors. Filming of the first season, consisting of 6 episodes, officially wrapped in September 2024, as announced by actor Dexter Saul Ansell. In October 2025, the composer was revealed. Many might have expected Ramin Djawadi at the helm, but the series' music was composed by Dan Romer, whose resume includes such projects as Luca and Station 11. The series' debut was initially expected at the end of 2025. However, at New York Comic Con in October 2025, HBO announced the official premiere date. The first season is set to air on Sunday, January 18, 2026 on HBO and will be available on Max. At the same event, the first trailer was unveiled, along with the story's tagline, a tall tale that became a legend. Even before the premiere in November 2025, HBO officially renewed the series for a second season, which is scheduled for release in 2027. According to the public, this decision was driven by the high quality of the first season and confidence in its success, as well as the desire to shorten the gap between seasons, which in the case of House of the Dragon amounts to 2 years. There's a practical consideration, too. The actor playing Young Egg might grow quite tall at some point, and he'll have to shave not just his head, but also his teenage whiskers. Francesca Orsi, head of drama at HBO, stated, "It's better to film everything quickly, so filming for the next 2 seasons will begin in March 2026. Story of the novellas. Since Martin emphasizes the adaptation's fidelity, and Ira Parker says he made the series just for George, let's talk about the source material. The first novella in the cycle, The Hedge Knight, was commissioned by publisher Robert Silverberg for the Legends anthology and was published in 1998. George conceived the novella as a standalone prehistory to the main saga. The writer aimed to create a work with a high level of realism, including in the depiction of medieval tournaments and everyday life, despite its fantasy genre. The publication by design could attract new readers to the main cycle, and the plan succeeded. Incidentally, George nearly missed the submission deadline. At that time, he didn't yet have great authority, though his reputation also hadn't been tarnished by delayed deadlines. In short, the publisher nearly removed Martin from the publication list, but at the last moment, the author of A Song of Ice and Fire jumped on the departing train. From a publishing success standpoint, the Dunk and Egg cycle played an important role in expanding Martin's readership. As intended, the publication of the first novella in the Legends anthology allowed the writer to attract many new fans. They later turned to his large-scale novels. As George himself put it, "The first novella in Robert Silverberg's fantasy anthology Legends brought me legions of new readers." As an inspirational source for writing the cycle, Martin cited his love for medieval tournaments and his desire to write about the common folk of Westeros, the so-called small folk. That's why, by the way, the production team was tasked with filming the best knightly combat ever shown on screen. Martin expressed his admiration for the 5th episode, where the season's main battle sequence unfolds, and praised the team's approach as excellent. To date, Martin has published 3 novellas in this series. The Hedge Knight was joined by The Sworn Sword, 2003, and The Mystery Knight, 2010. All 3 novellas were later published under the collective title A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms in 2015. In the first novella, the author used the tournament as the central narrative element. He meticulously recreated the atmosphere of a medieval contest, where knightly honor, greed, and social intrigues mixed together. Thus, the cycle began as a relatively intimate story, but over time the novellas became a tool for revealing the historical context and backstory of Westeros. Gaps were filled in. Nevertheless, the cycle evolved into an important element of the universe, explaining dynastic problems and political conflicts, whose echo later became Robert Baratheon's rebellion. It's clear that one of the most pressing creative challenges in writing the novellas is the need to maintain suspense, despite the fact that the fate of the main characters is already partly known to readers from the main saga. The writer has to carefully maneuver the narrative to preserve tension and unpredictability. In one interview, George himself noted, "The hints about their fate in A Song of Ice and Fire, well, that's actually the catch." In any case, the Dunk and Egg novellas allowed Martin to explore Westeros not only from the perspective of the great lords, but also from the viewpoint of the common folk, or at least the lowborn knighthood. The figure of the Hedge Knight, his wanderings in search of service and sustenance, contrasts with the power struggles of the mighty feudals of the Seven Kingdoms. This contrast is heightened when the main secret of the first season of the series is revealed. Martin, being a proponent of literary realism, used this contrast to demonstrate social inequality and the unpredictability of life in a feudal society. A scrupulous depiction of everyday details, difficulties in finding food, rust on armor, mockery from the nobility, serves as a powerful backdrop for stories of honor and valor. Thus, the cycle fulfills a dual function. It expands the world's history and simultaneously gives depth to the socio-political structure of Westeros. Frequent references to tournaments, hunts, as well as food and clothing reflect Martin's deep immersion in studying medieval life. Ultimately, the cycle represents a unique genre hybrid, a fantasy historical prose based on medieval realities, yet complemented by elements of magic and wonder. The storylines in the cycle, although centered around two main characters, constantly intersect with the histories of other houses and figures such as the Lannisters, Starks, Dondarrions, and Freys. Martin deliberately introduces small, seemingly insignificant details and then develops them. This approach requires him to constantly recheck information. For example, the color of characters' eyes became a subject of discussion and required consultation with experts, since Martin often mixed up details and the consistency of the world suffered. For George, the process of building a complex world is both fascinating and exhausting, as it requires constantly juggling plot lines. He's admitted that he uses the search function on his computer and the help of his assistants to keep track of all the details, including the genealogical trees he once developed himself. Ultimately, the complexity of the plot and the abundance of characters are part of the epic scale Martin aimed to create, going beyond Hollywood constraints. The trilogy became part of a global chronological tapestry. The writer planned to create a larger series of novellas and take Dunk and Egg from youth to their tragic death at Summerhall. He publicly announced 12 novellas, but A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms stalled, just like the main series. Readers have been waiting for the Winterfell Wolves as long as for the Winds of Winter, nearly 15 years. By the way, the series isn't the first visual adaptation of the Dunk and Egg novellas. The writer once shared a story about the emergence of the comics. The proposal to create a comic based on the Hedge Knight didn't come from me but from a publishing house. They contacted me and showed several preliminary sketches that didn't impress me, but the team was persistent and didn't give up. They kept looking for the right artist until they settled on Michael Miller. In the end, he did an absolutely perfect job. In my view, Michael very well managed to convey the inner essence of the characters through their appearance, exactly as I imagined them when writing the novella. My involvement in the project was minimal. I only carefully reviewed all the dialogues and artwork to make sure no errors or inaccuracies had crept in. In a video a couple of years ago, I already noted that the comics could serve as an excellent storyboard for a future series. I recommend everyone check them out. Context. Unlike most knights familiar to viewers from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, Dunk has no lineage, which gives an opportunity to look at Westeros from a different angle. Showrunner Ira Parker noted that the series draws on the odd couple dynamics beloved by many Game of Thrones fans. The official synopsis of the project describes the setting as an era when the Targaryen dynasty still holds the Iron Throne. The events of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms take place roughly a century before the events of the original Game of Thrones series. Consequently, Dunk's adventures occur about 100 years after the events shown at the beginning of House of the Dragon and 70 years after the events of its second season. An important detail is also this. The memory of the last dragon is still fresh in living memory. This period in the history of the Seven Kingdoms is rich with events. Westeros has only recently emerged from another civil conflict, the Blackfyre Rebellion. In it, the bastards of House Targaryen, the sons and descendants of Aegon IV, lay claim to the Iron Throne. But while the lords are bogged down in petty quarrels, life goes on for the common folk of Westeros, including the newly minted Sir Duncan the Tall. Despite his low origins, the main character embodies the purest ideals of knightly valor. Sir Arlan taught his protege not only swordsmanship but also strict rules of honor. Dunk's main strengths were his phenomenal physical power and his height of over 2 meters, as well as a sincere belief in knightly vows. The young knight couldn't read or write, but his mentor had trained him well in heraldry. Dunk is an archetype of a gray hero. According to Martin, he is more realistic than black and white characters, but his grayness lies more in poverty and lack of titles than in moral ambiguity. He performs deeds out of an inner sense of duty, not for glory or wealth, making him a rare exception among the knighthood. The character's actions often contrast with the cynicism and cruelty of high-born people. Dunk, though he may lack in tactics and refinement, wins through pure motivation and physical strength. It's his conviction and the need to protect the weak and innocent that attracts his loyal Squire Egg. A key symbol of honor is the coat of arms. The story of the elm tree and the falling star will most likely be adapted in the first season. The emblem reflects a humble yet noble purpose and hope for luck despite low status. Although Dunk acknowledges his lack of education, he compensates with instinctive righteousness, which has earned positive regard even among some members of the upper class. The atmosphere in Westeros during the time of the Dunk and Egg stories resembled the beginning of the A Song of Ice and Fire series, only without the subsequent great conflict. The Targaryens had recently lost their dragons and still hoped to bring them back. Although they kept dragon eggs, the belief in their revival was only a vague hope, not a guarantee. Stories about dragons, such as Balerion, who died long before the cycle's events, only deepen the nostalgia for the bygone era of might. The series of Blackfyre rebellions is a direct consequence of the controversial decision of Aegon IV the Unworthy. The widely hated king, on his deathbed, legitimized all his numerous bastards, including Daemon, which sparked the struggle for the throne. The Blackfyre uprisings left a deep mark on the history of Westeros, and the great houses shifted their allegiances depending on political gain. Martin used this period in Westeros's history to demonstrate cyclicality. In the fantasy universe, truces are often only temporary. The country is ruled by King Daeron II, who is by nature much better than his father, yet he led the country into a civil war against his half-brother, the Bastard. The outcome resulted in the confiscation of lands from many houses that had supported Daemon Blackfyre, which is why the king and his family, to put it mildly, are far from universally loved. We'll encounter this more than once against the backdrop of the main story. There's actually a lot of information in the world of Ice and Fire. George R.R. Martin, together with Elio Garcia and Linda Antonsen, compiled a considerable amount of material and later filled in the narrative gaps with additional information. The most interesting aspects of that period, in any case, touch upon the plots of the novellas. For a more detailed exploration of the era, everyone is waiting for the second volume of Fire and Blood. Politics of the period. The political struggle of that time was also embodied in the figure of Lord Brynden Rivers. Bloodraven, himself a great bastard of Aegon Targaryen with a reputation as a sorcerer, opposed the Blackfyre dynasty out of personal enmity toward his half-brother Bittersteel, Aegor Rivers. Brynden relied on cunning and sometimes cruel methods. He used spies and dark magic. The backdrop of constant intrigue and distrust shows that ruling at the Targaryen court was always a complex and dangerous endeavor, one that required not only strength but also political acumen. Format. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has a clearly smaller scale than House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. According to the creators, the series has a lighter and more comedic tone. Martin highlighted an important difference from previous shows. This time, there are no dragons, no huge battles, no White Walkers. Nevertheless, this isn't an ideal, happy fantasy. The previously mentioned political conflict and the brutal violence typical of Westeros are still felt here. Peter Claffey noted that even with the lighter tone, the project is likely the most unsettling and dramatic one he's been involved in. Dunk and Egg as characters naturally lend themselves to comedy, and the creators have found a golden mean in this regard. Ira Parker emphasized that the comedic elements mustn't be excessive, so as not to undermine the authenticity of the Game of Thrones world. The comedic component should feel like a whisper against the silence and blend organically into the overall fabric of the series. Parker noted that the Dunk and Egg books are so fundamentally different from the main series that it was easy to achieve the intended goal. The creators also wanted to make the series bold and new in aesthetic terms. Although the visuals may appear bright and colorful, especially during the tournament, they avoid a fairy tale feel. Ira aimed to give the project more realism. In the 14th century, people loved bright colors, but at the same time, he didn't want to fall into excessive fantasy. In the 5th episode, dark and gloomy night scenes will be shown with minimal artificial lighting to preserve realism. Casting required special attention since Duncan the Tall serves as the sole narrative viewpoint. Irish actor Peter Claffey was a candidate from the start, and Parker noted an exponential improvement with each take, exactly what he wanted to see. Claffey brought the necessary inner unease and humility to the role. The casting for Egg went smoothly. Dexter's Saul Ansel was the first candidate, and Ira immediately sensed a perfect fit. The most challenging role was Prince Baelor Breakspear Targaryen. There was a risk he'd seem bland as a restrained, thoughtful, kind, and honest leader, but Bertie Carvel gave him extra sharpness and spark. Parker also highly praised Daniel Ings. Martin warned Parker about Lionel Baratheon. "You have to be careful. This guy could steal the show." The team paid great attention to extras and background details to build a specific social atmosphere. Parker noted that background actors are much closer to Dunk's identity than lords and princes, since Dunk comes from the common folk. He also included Easter eggs for fans. For example, Dunk walks the same road where Brienne and Podrick would travel later. Claffey praised Gwendoline Christie's portrayal of Brienne and noted similarities between their characters. Parker mentioned possible future cameos, including the infant Walder Frey. Dunk might doting the infant Walder Frey. Dunk might save him from a runaway cart, but it'll happen in the background. Prince Aemon, the future Maester of the Night's Watch, might also make a brief appearance. Main actors. Peter and Dexter always give comments together, likely to avoid leaving the young actor playing Egg alone with the press. They face challenges in establishing their characters' dynamic from the start. Their first joint scene, where Dunk and Egg meet, was also their first scene together. Claffey admitted it was difficult. The cloak didn't sit right and interfered with his movements, but the finished scene looks really good. For his role, Dexter shaved his head instead of wearing a wig. He discovered being bald is very cold, but turned it into a school business. Classmates had to buy him something to touch his head. Claffey admitted he never watched House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, but knew the series would lean on comedic aspects. He and Parker removed repetitive jokes, like Dunk constantly bumping his head. Dexter focused on reading the novellas for his role. Claffey highly praised the stunt team's work in battle scenes, calling them heroes. Thank you for watching the video. Your subscription and like motivate me to produce more videos.